Well, hello, everybody. It's Terry from the Drone Cav here at Romero Pictures Indy Brigade, enjoying a scorching, hot Florida sunny day. But hey, it's a beautiful day. Heat index is about 105 today, so yeah, so it's warm. But anyway, we're out here having fun. So anyway, this is kind of part two. If you watched last week's episode, we're going into the mechanics of flight. We're not really talking so much about camera settings and getting shots and all that stuff for a while. We're talking about how to fly, how to be a better pilot, and things to do to get you off the ground the right way. So today, one of the most critical, most important things to do and get in the habit of and to learn and to stick with and just do without fail every single flight, whether it's a small flight, a big flight, whatever you're doing, a pre-flight checklist. Hey, remember, you're a pilot. You're flying an aircraft. If you got on a commercial aircraft, you would like to know that the pilot up front has went through a checklist, that all his equipment's working, that all the electronics are up to speed, the airspace is good, the weather's good. Professional pilots go through this, and you are a professional pilot at this point. So anyway, you have a checklist. Of course, not quite as involved. And today, we're going to go through the same checklist that I use. It has 10 primary items, and these cover the big bases. It's a good place to get started. I'm going to put a link in the comments so you can download your own copy of this and you can work off of it. You can edit it. You can add things. Sometimes I do add, depending on the shoot. I will add a few more checklist items to customize it. But this is sort of my basic fundamental checklist to work with. So anyway, let's jump into some of these things and take a look. Okay, number one. This seems kind of basic, but you would be amazed at how easy it is to overlook or forget something. And this is about getting your batteries charged. So typically the night before I go on a shoot, I will put everything on the charger or chargers, as the case may be, because you do have multiple batteries. So your aircraft battery itself, of course, you'll have a charger for that. And if you have multiple batteries, like in the case I do, to make it easier, they do make multi-chargers where you can connect several batteries. Now, keep in mind, they don't charge all the batteries up at the same time. That's dumping a bunch of voltage. There are some third-party aftermarket things you'll find on Amazon that do that. I kind of don't really trust that stuff. I go with what the manufacturer recommends. Autel makes their own multi-charger. It's kind of this little vertical box. You pop the batteries on it, and it charges them up in sequence. Same with the Mavic Mini. Comes with a little charger brick. The new Mavic Air 2 has their own thing. You can pop all your batteries in, and it's going to go down, charge them each sequentially. Now, let's not forget your controller also needs to be charged. I'm getting that in front of my face. Charge up your controller as well. And last but not least, your phone, whatever you're using for a control device, whether it's a tablet. I use, sometimes I'll just use my iPhone. I do have a dedicated LG here, a Stylo 3. It's a little older phone, but hey, it works great. So it's got a nice big screen, charges up quick and easy, and I can just sort of keep it in the bag as a backup if nothing else. So anyway, make sure all your batteries are charged. It seems simple, seems basic, seems fundamental, but nothing worse than getting out on site and going to put the drone up in the air and finding out you only have one battery with a full charge or worse. So anyway, charge your batteries. Number one. Number two. You've heard me talk about this before. You've heard me talk about it more than once. And I will not stop talking about it. I am always going to bring this up. I'm always just going to make a big red flag out of this. So, don't forget your gimbal. Your gimbal holder. This guy right here, of course, it's there to protect your gimbal when you're traveling, because your gimbal is kind of a fragile device. It's a 3-axis stabilizer. It moves around. It's got dampers. It's holding the camera. I mean, it's got a lot of sensitive electronics there and a lot going on. So you can't just throw it in your bag and bounce down the road with it. Well, you can if you want to break it, but hey, pricey repair there. So anyway, drones come with a little gimbal holder. If they don't, you can find them. Third parties make them. They're easy enough to find. No excuse for not having one. But a real common thing is you'll get out on site, you'll get set up, get everything plugged in, you've got people in your ear, you're talking, you got all this stuff going on, you're thinking about your shot, thinking about the weather, thinking about all these million things to do. You put the drone down, you power it up, and then it hits you. Hopefully it hits you that quick before you get in the air that you left your gimbal cover on. Well, what can that do? Well, your gimbal goes through, and I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Your gimbal, when you first start up your drone, goes through a calibration. It rotates, it moves, it checks its range of motion, that it can move, that it's working fine, that all three of the motors are working well, and it reports back. If there's an error, it will tell you on your control screen. The problem is, if your gimbal is fixed like this, it can't move, and all those motors are trying to run, trying to turn, and it can very likely damage a gimbal motor. Again, a pricey repair. It will end your day quick. So take 2 seconds and pop your gimbal cover off. If you have to, put a red ribbon or something on it, anything, just to make sure you get this thing out of there before you start flying. Again, the Evo, they make, I'm flying an Evo 1. They're kind of this white translucent plastic. It's kind of easy to spot, but again, just ingrain in your mind. But if you're adhering to your checklist, you're going to see it because it's item number 2 on your pre-flight checklist. Number 3, your propellers, or impellers as some like to call them, are it's obvious how critical they are to flight. If you have one propeller, one prop broken, damaged, bent, don't even think about that, or otherwise not working properly, you're going to again end your flight quickly, and it's not a good thing. So you don't want to lose a motor, you don't want to lose a propeller. Now, a lot of propellers now snap on. They have sort of this press and release mechanism. It's really cool. It's really quick and easy to swap out propellers. So just take a second when you put your drone on the landing pad, go around and just make sure all those are tight. Now, some other drones have screw-on propellers that the threads are threaded the opposite direction the motors turn. That keeps them from loosening up. If anything, they're just going to tighten up in flight. And you're going to find those on older Phantoms and things like that. Some, like the Mavic Mini, they actually have a Phillips Plus screw that screws them onto the motor. So those are another attachment method. So they are going to vary depending on what make, what kind of drone you have. But just take a second to check and make sure the propellers are tight, are secure. Now, another thing to look at is the edges of the propellers. Make sure they're not chipped. Make sure you haven't nicked anything, or if you've had a rough landing or two, you haven't chipped the tips or the ends or whatever. You want to make sure they're in good shape. And lastly, you want to take a look and make sure they have a nice profile. And by profile, I mean sort of that curvature, because that's what's going to dictate the amount of lift that you have. Now, there is kind of a, I won't call it really a problem, it's sort of a phenomenon, a thing to be aware of with the Mavic Minis. Again, I talk a lot about the Minis. The Minis come with a, if you get the Fly More combo, which has the extra batteries in the case and all, they come with this really nice hard case. But the way the props kind of flop around on the Mini when you put it in the case, you got to be careful about how you get it in there, because I don't have the Mini here, or I'd show you, but the props can lay under the belly of the drone in the case. And I'm reading some reports online. It hasn't happened to me because I'm crazy fanatical about this, but I'm reading some reports online where people are getting their props flattened out because they kind of get mashed in there, and it's causing either a motor error when they take off, or a flight control issue with reduced lift. Again, just kind of be careful about your props and propellers, and if you do have damaged ones, hey, just replace it. They're cheap. Always use the manufacturer's props, though. Again, there's a lot of aftermarket ones, and there's some that have some silly stuff like LED lights and stuff. All right, yeah, I get it, it's cool, but the engineers that designed this thing designed it to fly in a certain way with certain equipment, and you know, these third-party cheapy tack-on things, I ain't gonna trust them. I've looked at the quality difference. I mean, if you could see these up close, touch and feel how the quality is built in there, and look at some of these aftermarket things that are just like this flimsy 2 pieces of plastic junk. No, I'm not putting my $1,500 drone rig in the air on something junky like that. So anyway, that's my lecture on props. But anyway, before you take off, take a look at those props, make sure they're in good shape, make sure they're tight. Okay, item number 4. This revolves around your controller. Now, your controller, again, it's kind of obvious how important this thing is. It needs to, boy, it's hot out here. Sorry, smoking hot out here. Your controller needs to maintain excellent contact with your aircraft at all times. Obviously for flight control, but also to see your video feed and see what's going on. So how does it do this? Antennas. Antennas, sometimes, again, you get in a hurry, you can forget to deploy those, but you're going to keep hearing me say this, if you're sticking with your pre-flight checklist, you're not going to miss it. That's what your checklist is for, is to remind you of these things. Now, a couple tips about the antennas. See how the antennas are kind of in an upright position? They move. You can turn them around different ways. Now, on this particular controller, it has the holder for the viewing screen, the phone or whatever. And typically, you're going to want the antennas in a somewhat vertical orientation if you're flying, say, a distance. You're flying out or whatever. But a lot of times you're going to fly, or typically I do, like a lot of crane shots, things like that. I'm not going too far away, so I really don't need that crazy distance thing, but I may need some altitude. So in a case like that, dip your antennas horizontally. And can you see that? I don't know if my black shirt in the background is drowning it out. But anyway, you can put your antennas horizontally. Here's another kind of cool tip. Now notice in the upright position, they're not actually completely vertical. They're kind of up at an angle. So, how do you fix that? You rotate them, and you can put them straight down. Now that's going to give you, again, a good maximum horizontal distance going out that way. So, a few different ways to use your antennas. So again, you have the down position, and again, don't think of them being down here, they're going to get less signal, because hey, there's not a whole lot of difference in that much distance between the two antennas. So move them around however you see fit, but sometimes I like to put them down here as long as they're not in the way, and that works out really well. So anyway, there's your antenna tip. Don't forget to deploy your antennas, and also they're in good shape and not broken. Number 5. We want to talk about binding for a second. And what that means is everything is talking. And typically you're going to have 3 components at play here. You're going to have the drone, controller, and your control device, your phone or whatever. You want to make sure those are bound, or they're all talking to each other. Now, if you have all your settings set up correctly to begin with, that's just going to be a verification step. And what I like to do is power everything up in a sequence, and then power everything down in the reverse of that sequence. So what would that sequence be? All right. So I've got the control screen mounted in the controller, the phone. I would power that on first. Second would be the controller. Make sure those 2 guys are talking. Then go over and power up the drone. That would be third. So pre-flight, you would go sort of in 3 steps out toward the drone, from you being control screen, say phone, controller, and drone. Now when you land, you'll do it in the opposite. Power the drone down, power the controller down, power your phone down. Again, typically you want to get your drone powered down first when you land for safety reasons. Plus your battery is probably getting close to spent, so it's good to go ahead and shut that guy down. So again, pre-flight 1, 2, 3, landing 3, 2, 1. That's simple, but you want to make sure everything is talking. Your control screen is going to tell you that before you take off, that you have a good connection. Depending on your make and model, it will even give you a verbal feedback. It will say device connected or something to that effect. So anyway, number 5 on your pre-flight checklist. Again, stick to the checklist and you won't forget these things. Number 6. I'm not holding my fingers up anymore. I'm running out of hands. I'm holding things. So anyway, we're just going to have to go on verbal numbers. Anyway, number 6 is to make sure your firmware is updated. Okay, well, what's firmware in the first place? Firmware is the stuff that runs the drone, basically, to put it in a very basic form, and also the controller, and also the batteries. It's easy to forget that batteries on drones like these have intelligent batteries that manage their rate of discharge, their rate of charging, their temperature, a lot of stuff like that. So you may have firmware updates that apply to your batteries sometimes. In that case, you have to swap each battery out into the drone and let it do the update. Firmware updates are also excellent to do because they are giving you the latest updates, whether it be flight control, flight stability. Lots of times they add features. Good example, recently the Mavic Minis got a firmware update where the cameras initially had just these really basic settings. I mean, you couldn't do a whole lot with the cameras. I mean, you could tinker with the exposure a little bit, but now you can adjust shutter settings and do some really cool things out of that little camera. So keep up with those firmware updates. Again, flight safety is always an important thing, and you'll see them add stability improvements and things like that, or they'll also have improvements to the controller. Maybe the software changes somewhat or whatever. Now, on your control device, your phone, that's going to run off an app itself. So that's going to come through like the App Store update or the Google Play, whatever you're using for a control device. That's going to be its own update. So keep everything in sync. Don't update the drone and not update your app, or vice versa, and get your updates out of balance. Just take a few minutes, check for your firmware updates. That's going to be found in your settings. Again, it's going to vary depending if you're flying a DJI, an Autel, whatever, but it will find that when you power up and if you're connected to the internet. So anyway, keep your firmware up to date. It's going to give you a lot less hassle. I know if you read around online, some people are like, nah, I'm sticking with firmware version 1 point dot blah, 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 because it let me do this. That just means you're flying outdated, and there's going to be support issues, and just update your firmware. It's worth it to know you're flying the best, the latest, the most up-to-date stuff the engineers at the manufacturer are putting out. They wouldn't put it out if it was junk. They want you to get the most out of your drone, so it's important to keep that updated.
Please hang up and try again.
Number 7, be familiar with your flight controls. Is there something new? I mean, we just talked about firmware updates in the last step. Has there been a new feature added? A new thing on your screen to tap or check out? Did some drone controllers have programmable buttons on the back here? Has that functionality changed any? Be familiar with your flight controls. If there's something new, be sure to work it out before you fly any significant distance, altitude, or anything like that. But kind of stepping back a little more fundamentally, just be aware of what all the buttons do on your controller and your software. I mean, we're not going to get into all that right now, but your power button, your return to home button is an important thing to know if you need to bring your drone back home suddenly. The pause button, what does it do? Good question. That's something to find out. I could tell you, but that's something to explore. The buttons on the back, your camera, your video, what the scroll wheels do, because you want to be able to use these without looking, without thinking about it. It's almost got to be like muscle memory. It just sort of comes to you. You know automatically, boom, right here's this and that, and I want to control this or that. You want to do it, I won't say without thinking. You should always be thinking about what you're doing, but you don't want to have to, kind of like typing. You don't want to hunt and peck with one finger and dig around and poke around, waste all this time, because remember, you're burning battery every second you're in the air. You want to be efficient with your flight, and you want to be smooth with your flight. You want to get the best result, again, safely, get the best camera shots, best camera angles and all that, but you want to get the most out of your time in the air. So being familiar with your flight controls, your controller, your software and all that stuff, again, it's going to be good practice even if you just put the drone up in the air a couple feet and sit here and burn through batteries. If you don't have anything else to do, don't worry about flying 500 feet and 200 feet high and playing around with it. put the drone up in your backyard, 5 feet in the air, and just go through and practice these controls. Practice turns. Just mess around with the buttons and see what they do, and learn about how these things work. And it's going to really pay off. Now, your flight area is something really important to consider. When you're flying around people, around property, around vehicles, anything like that, this goes back to something you've heard me talk about before as far as planning your shot. You want to plan where these things are and where they're going to be throughout the duration of your flight. Again, safety is an important thing. You want to think about invisibles. And what I mean by invisibles are things like power lines, things that can sneak up on you. You might be flying out a distance, and again, you are required to keep your aircraft within your visual line of sight. That means you have to be able to see it from where you're at. Not through the camera, not through your controller. That's one thing, that's what it is. But you need to be able to visually see that drone wherever it is. So, keeping an eye on your flight area, looking around for any obstructions, again, buildings, towers. One thing that trips people up, unfortunately, sometimes are guy wires, like for cell phone tower inspections. You've seen those lines that come out. Well, those darn things, they can be darn near impossible to spot, and they will stop your flight in a second. So always be aware of your flight area. Make sure you're not flying over people or in situations that can be potentially dangerous, or in the worst case, if you're just out flying by yourself, out in the mountains somewhere, that's cool too. But be aware of trees and things that could sneak up on you and cause a bad day to your flight. So that's part of securing your flight area. Very important thing to do. It's right there on the checklist, kind of near the end, because it's one of those last things you really don't want to forget about. All right, you heard me at the beginning here. It's a hot, sunny, beautiful Florida day. But did I say hot? Well, you want to check the weather. And the weather is going to be critical because you are flying outside, right? So you don't want to fly in rain, obviously, because drones aren't real rain friendly. Winds are a factor. You can't fly in super high winds. Most drones, like the Evo, the Mavic Pros, the Mavic Air 2, they can handle pretty decent wind. But again, you don't want to have a gust cause you a problem. So you want to check the weather. And an app I've talked about before, strongly recommend, is called UAV Forecast. It's a free app. They do have some paid upgrades that give you like extended forecast and much more detailed information, but the basic free version, it'll do the job. It's going to tell you things like the chance of rain, the KP index. Again, remember the KP index, it's sunspots that can cause a solar flare that can affect your communication between your controller. So there's a lot of little things there to consider. So be mindful of the weather for all those reasons, and kind of circling back around here to the scorching hot day we're having here in Florida. Don't get yourself dehydrated out there. Drink a ton of water. Stay in the shade when you can. Keep your batteries cool. Keep all your electronics cool, because they can overheat and shut down on you. And just be mindful of all that stuff. The direct sun, the heat. I mean, it's not only going to affect your equipment, it's going to affect you too. So the weather is really key and critical to keeping an eye on when you fly. Check it the night before so you can plan, but when you get on site or on set, check it again then, and keep an eye on it throughout the duration of your flight mission, and you'll stay out of weather trouble anyway. Now for number 10. Number 10, what could it be? The last big exciting thing. Oh man, my big dramatic thing didn't work out. See, I was going to do like this magic trick thing, but never mind. Anyway, keep you a little cloth, a little microfiber cloth in your bag, in your flight bag. Keep a bunch of them, how many ever you have. This is just a little like lens cleaner thing for sunglasses or whatever. Because before you put your drone in the air, you want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Whether you think it needs it or not, take a few seconds and do it. Alright, here on the Evo, let's look on the bottom. See these dots? Now these two big silver guys, these are sonic sensors. They're like a sonar that bounces off the ground to help it land. A little harder to see. We've got a couple other things. These are camera lenses that record what is under the drone when it takes off. It also is looking down in flight. On the front, same thing. We've got two binocular visual sensors in the front that are part of the obstacle avoidance. So what it does is it's constantly, as the drone is flying, it's looking ahead to see what's out there so it can map its environment to avoid flying into something, or if it needs to fly around it. What am I doing? I am cleaning those off. I am giving them a good wipe down, because flying through the air, especially repeatedly, if you don't stop and do a little lens cleaning maintenance now and then, I do it constantly because I'm, again, just crazy that way. You can get buildup on there. You can get, bugs, whatever. It can just build up on your lenses, and those can be impaired and not work as well. Same for your camera lens. Not going to pop this off right now. Give it a wipe down. Get the fingerprints off, especially if you're spinning on an ND filter. You're probably going to get a fingerprint on it. So wipe that down on the inside and out before you put it on the camera. And once you're done, give it one more final wipe to make sure you didn't get any fingerprints on it after you put it on. So again, a little microfiber cloth. Clean all your lenses. That way your optical tracking and obstacle avoidance is going to stay working good. Your camera lens is going to show up good. It's not going to have a smudgy fingerprint on it. And keep in mind, some of these newer drones, this is the Autel Evo 1, the Evo 2s, they're just coming out. They have these sensors in the front, the sides, the back. Do they have them on the top? I can't remember, but they have them all over the place. And see, this guy even has them in the back. So yeah, clean all your sensors, clean all your lenses, and it's going to help the drone fly better, plus make sure you get the best image out of the camera.